Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
As lawmakers look toward the August recess, several of the year's biggest policy debates remain unresolved. Budget issues, pending nominees, and early discussions about another reconciliation bill are all competing for attention on Capitol Hill. Here with an update on where things stand is Loren Duggan, Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. Loren, great to have you back. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
It is not a slow summer yet, and last week the president gave a national address. Let's not get into the particulars of what he said, but it was really an effort to rally support for the SAVE Act. So let's start there. Do you think it had its intended effect in Congress?
The dynamics around the Save America Act, as he has called it at times too, it seems stuck. The House has passed a version of it that had two of the things he's asked for, which is the voter ID provision and the proof of citizenship before you register to vote provision. The mail-in ballots has not gone through the House. The Senate had a debate around some of those issues, but as we know, it got stuck on them. It has not moved forward. There does not appear to be the 60 votes you would need to pass that legislation. And as he's called for, there doesn't seem to be the votes to end the filibuster or make some change there. Now, proponents of that, like Senator Mike Lee, who's been a big backer of the Save America Act and also a big backer of staying on the Senate floor to talk about it as long as possible, he obviously had immediate posts on X about this is proof that we need to deal with this legislation and get it through. So we'll see as lawmakers return if that has changed the dynamics. But for a long time, they've seemed pretty locked as where they were before a couple of months ago. So.
And that is now having effects in some of the other funding legislation. So the House brought out its Reconciliation 3.0 blueprint, and SAVE was in and around that. What do we know about the blueprint, and how does this SAVE Act affect it?
Yeah, SAVE has gotten attached or talked about being attached to multiple pieces of legislation, with proponents in the House saying we need to send the Senate this any way we can to try to force them to accept it. On the reconciliation front, what we saw last week is the House Budget Committee approve a resolution, which is the first step in this process, saying to the House Administration Committee, give us $10 billion worth of spending related to things under your jurisdiction, which is going to be grants around some of these questions. That's different than the SAVE Act, but they're trying to do whatever they can to push that SAVE Act legislation in there. When you get to the Senate with the eventual bill, they have that Byrd rule that we've talked about probably in the past that limits what can be included in a reconciliation bill. It's supposed to be budget related, not supposed to be strict policy. And that language could run into like a buzzsaw into the parliamentarian or into a situation there. So people who are pushing for reconciliation for some of this even admit that they're not likely to get the whole thing in there just because of the rules and the dynamic around that policy.
Well, let's keep pulling on the Recon 3.0 thread for a minute, because they are running out of runway to get this through in time. And there seems to be a lot of contention, even in the House, about what the final provisions will be. So what's likely to happen next with this, at least over the next week or so?
If the House can adopt this resolution, the first step, they'll send it over to the Senate, and it's unclear, are they going to take that up right away at all? Will it meet their needs? Because this has, I think, around $60 billion for defense, another maybe 13 for intelligence programs, and then some agricultural language in there. And this is just step one, saying committees give us that language. It doesn't even have the specifics yet. That doesn't include the money that the president asked for to be part of his $1.5 trillion defense top line. That was supposed to include action and reconciliation. That's not there. There aren't offsets, which some members have said they may like to see in both chambers. And when we're talking about the sort of narrow majorities you have in the House and the Senate, 1, 2, 3, 4 members pushing for something could be enough to cause a problem. So, this is far from locked in at this point. They're not as aligned on this at this stage as they were on the One Big Beautiful Bill or even that Homeland Security funding bill that was done through reconciliation. It seems like they're still building support and consensus. But if they can get this to the floor of the House and over the line, that will be a step, and we'll see what happens from there.
Loren Duggan is Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. Loren, let's go back to the first part of the Recon 3.0 that you mentioned, the defense supplemental. That itself is spurring a whole lot of different kinds of conversations. It keeps bringing up, well, do we want to approve money for the operation in Iran that we maybe do or do not support? And it's having implications on the NDAA. Kind of walk us through how all of those dots are getting connected.
Yeah, the defense funding picture and policy picture has been pretty complicated. On the NDAA front, they've talked about trying to get that done maybe before they leave for their August recess in the House. The Senate last week had a procedural vote, couldn't get enough support to even get the bill on the floor because of the Iran dynamics, the war that was kind of concluded and then resumed. And we've seen a lot of votes around the War Powers Resolution trying to curtail that. It's going to be hard not to talk about Iran in NDAA should that come up. The supplemental itself is to provide funding to make up for some of what has been spent in the operations to date. It's hard to avoid the Iran question when you're providing funding related to Iran. So I do think that is going to feed into the debate and continue to as they figure out what to do moving forward and then get to the appropriations picture, which they have to deal with that later as well. So a lot to talk about there on defense in Iran.
And at the end of last week, Speaker Johnson said he wanted to try to do a continuing resolution early on. And so my mind just boggles at trying to get all of that through, but that's kind of a different take. What's he trying to propose there?
The idea here is to lock in government funding past September 30th. The way that text is written is going to be key to whether lawmakers can support it on both sides of the aisle. I think that he might have a right flank to deal with on the Republicans, and if he loses a significant chunk of Republicans, then he might need some Democratic support. And how do you get that? But if they could, in July, have a piece of paper over in the Senate that says, don't shut down the government, basically, because we'll fund it, then that would be a potential way to avoid that dynamic in September when they come back. But the details are going to matter. If there's a pill in there or a provision that Democrats see as a poison pill, they may not want to back it. We'll have to see if it's language that will make the Senate happy, where you do need 60 votes likely to get that over the line. So again, the details are going to matter on the CR and what it says, how long it runs, and what might get attached to it.
Well, obviously, the funding bills are at the top of our list, but there were a number of hearings last week, confirmation hearings, that also play into other sorts of legislation that might or might not move forward. There were 2 hearings for folks in Health and Human Services, the CDC director, the administrator for strategic preparedness. We had Jay Clayton and we had Todd Blanche on the Hill. So walk us through the hot takes from those confirmation hearings and what the implications might be for related legislation.
Yes, and another one we were watching was Keith Sunderland to be the labor secretary. So there are these key vacancies they're trying to fill. Jay Clayton for Director of National Intelligence is one that had a direct tie to legislation because the FISA provisions that expired several weeks ago, his confirmation as the full-time DNI, replacing Bill Pulte as the temporary DNI, had been seen as key to that. He was scheduled for a hearing several weeks ago, was pulled back by the White House. They canceled that, and they resumed that last week. Democrats had some negative things to say about him afterwards and some tough questions during the session. So we'll see what the confirmation picture looks like for him. There may be the 50 votes they would need to confirm him, get him over the line. Maybe that opens up FISA, but we'll have to see. On the CDC front, obviously, healthcare policy has been top of mind for a number of lawmakers, vaccine policy, things like that, tough questions around that. And then when it comes to Todd Blanche, he faced questions around some of the things with the Epstein files and other matters and his relationship with the president and what that means being attorney general. And we'll have to see if he's got the votes on side there to move those forward. Something we're wondering is they still have to fill some committee slots from the death of Senator Graham, and then they're still working in some committees through Mitch McConnell's absence as he continues to recover from his health challenges there. So having all the people in place to move those forward will be key, because in some of these committees, one vote is enough to prevent things from moving forward. Judiciary, Lindsey Graham was on that, so they need to be fully constituted to get that over the line. But I could see John Thune, the majority leader, making a big push before they leave in a couple of weeks to get these over the line and in place.
There was one more set of hearings I would love to get your take on. Russ Vought was on the Hill last week a couple of times. What did you hear? Any tough questions about the 2027 budget, the administration's approach to impoundment? Those have been recurring issues when Mr. Vought is on the Hill.
Yeah, I mean, the hearings he were up there for were not only about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which he's the acting head of, and but they take opportunities when you're up there to ask you questions. So yeah, he did face some tough questions. I think lawmakers always have some thoughts about what's been going on at OMB and asking about those. So that's been a kind of tense relationship between the Hill and Russwood. I'm assuming that will continue as he continues in maybe his dual roles or multiple roles up there on OMB. But yeah, a little bit of a tough hearing here for him.
Loren Duggan is the Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. Loren, we'll keep our fingers crossed that some of this gets across the line before they go on recess. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.